Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Today I remember to bring my head strap. So you guys are on my head right now. You can see me. Hi. I'll put you back on my head. That way you can see what I'm doing. And you can also probably see my ginormous belly, to be honest. All right, so today we're gonna go ahead and start off making our chocolate chip cookie recipe, okay? And we're gonna practice our measurement techniques, all right? So for this recipe, this is gonna make a smaller batch of chocolate chip cookies. We're not making a great big batch of chocolate chip cookies. We're just making a small batch of chocolate chip cookies, okay? So we're gonna only need 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of flour, half a teaspoon of baking soda, half a teaspoon of salt, half a cup of butter, softened, 3 tablespoons of granulated sugar, 3 tablespoons of packed brown sugar, half a teaspoon of vanilla extract, 1 large egg, and 1 cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. So first things first, before I get started measuring out any of my ingredients, I'm gonna start off with proper food safety sanitation practices and wash my hands. So I'm gonna get my water nice and hot as I can stand it. Get my hands nice and wet. Make sure I'm scrubbing in between my fingers, in between my fingernails. All right, still getting in between my fingers and my fingernails. I'm gonna get my towel and dry my hands. Okay, so reading through the directions, the very first step says I need to preheat my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. So every oven is different. To preheat mine, I have to hit the bake button. And then right now it automatically has it starting to preheat at 350 degrees, but I need it preheated to 375. So I'm gonna increase the temperature to 375 and hit start, okay? And it's gonna pop up and says that it's preheating. Every oven is gonna be a little different, so you need to check with your parents on how to preheat your oven specifically if you're not familiar with it, okay? All right, my next step says I'm gonna combine my flour, my baking soda, and salt into a small bowl. Okay, so I've got a bowl here. I'm gonna go ahead, and it says I'm gonna combine my flour, baking soda, and salt. And it looks like I need 1 cup and 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. So if we remember correctly, to measure our flour out, I have multiple types of measuring cups, right? And I have multiple sizes of measuring spoons, okay? In order to measure 1 cup and 2 tablespoons, I'm gonna have to make 2 measurements. I'm gonna have to use my 1 cup measuring cup, which is my largest measuring cup, and then my 2 tablespoon, which is my 1 tablespoon, which is my largest measuring spoon, twice, okay? So if you remember that measurement worksheet that we did, there were some of those questions on how do you measure out 3/4 of a cup? How do you measure out 2 tablespoons? You're gonna have to use your 1 tablespoon measurement twice because you don't have a 2 tablespoon measuring spoon, okay? So we're gonna go ahead. We're gonna practice measuring our flour out. I have a lovely little container that I keep my flour in. Okay, you might just keep yours in a bag, or your parents might keep yours in a container as well. I'm actually gonna get a larger spoon for this. Okay, so to measure our flour, if we remember correctly, I get a small bowl. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna fluff my flour, try to make sure there's no lumps in here, and make sure to aerate it really well. Get a lot of air in there, because we want our cookies to be light and fluffy. We don't want our flour to be packed down. So to measure out our flour, okay, I'm gonna measure this out so it's heaping. So I'm gonna go ahead, start adding flour to my measuring cup. And I've put a bowl underneath here because I want to measure this out so it's heaping. So some of the flour is either going to end up in the bowl or it's going to end up on my countertop. And more than likely your parents would rather you have the flour on your countertop, on your bowl, in a bowl, rather than on your countertop. So, now that flour is heaping, I'm gonna take a knife and level it off. As a reminder, flour, you don't want it packed down. Flour, you want it to be nice and airy. So I'm gonna take that straight edge from my knife and just level it off right there, just like that, okay? And that's exactly 1 cup of flour, okay? But I need more than just 1 cup. It says I need 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons, okay? So I actually have some excess flour here, and rather than getting the flour out of my jar, I'm gonna go ahead and just take the excess flour out of here. Same thing, this flour is already nice and aerated, so let's go ahead, fill up my tablespoon. It's that largest measuring spoon you have. Same thing. I'm gonna get it nice and heaping, take my straight edge, level it off, okay? I don't want it packed down. So that's 1 cup and 1 tablespoon, but I need 2 tablespoons, so I'm gonna go ahead and fill it up again. Level it off. Awesome. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the excess flour back in my jar. Put this off to the side. And I don't know about you, but every time I work with flour, I always get tons of it everywhere. Okay. So, got my flour in my bowl. I also need baking soda. It says I need ½ teaspoon of baking soda. So looking at my measuring spoons, I've got my tablespoon, my 1 teaspoon, ½ teaspoon, and 1/4 teaspoon. So I need my ½ teaspoon, okay? It's one of my smaller ones. And it says I need baking soda. Okay. Baking soda and baking powder are both leavening agents. These ingredients are what help make your cookies rise and get nice and fluffy the way you like them. Baking soda and baking powder are not the same. Okay, these are not the same. If a recipe calls for baking soda, you need to use baking soda. If a recipe calls for baking powder, you need to use baking powder. Baking powder actually has baking soda and then some other ingredients in it in order to make it rise, okay? So these ingredients can't be used interchangeably. So you need to make sure that you're using baking soda and not baking powder, okay? If you guys take culinary with me, we'll talk more about this then and the difference between baking soda and baking powder. But for this recipe, we need baking soda, okay? And it says I need ½ teaspoon. So what I'm gonna do, just like you would flour, I try to fluff it up a little bit, get any lumps out, and then rather than scooping it out heaping, baking soda typically has a nice little straight edge here on the box that I like to use to level it out. So I'll kind of get it out heaping, then I'll use the nice little straight edge here and level it out. See, just like that. Okay. So I've got my flour, my baking soda, and it looks like I need salt as well. And I also need ½ teaspoon of salt. Okay. So salt, I need ½ teaspoon. I'm gonna get my bowl again. Try to measure out my salt the best I can. Get it nice and heaping like I would my flour. And with a straight edge, level it. Perfect. Okay. So now that I've got my flour, my baking soda, and salt in a small bowl, I'm gonna go ahead and just take a little fork or a whisk and kind of stir and combine them a little bit. Okay, make sure they're nice and combined so I don't have chunks of salt in my cookies or chunks of baking soda in my cookies. And then it says we're going to beat our butter, granulated sugar, brown sugar, and vanilla extract in a large mixer bowl until creamy. Okay. Your butter says we need 1/2 cup of butter softened. Your butter comes in sticks. All right. 1 stick of butter is 8 tablespoons of butter, or 1/2 cup, if you guys can see that. 8 tablespoons or 1/2 cup. When your recipe says it needs your butter softened, they want you to take your butter and set it out at room temperature till it's nice and soft, where you can kind of press into it. You don't want your butter melted. You don't want melted butter. You just want your butter softened, okay? That way you can cream it together with your sugar. So softened butter is different than melted butter, all right? We want our butter softened. I've had my butter setting out for a little bit, so my butter is fairly soft. It could be a little softer, but we're gonna go ahead and start using it, okay? If you have a standing mixer like I do at home, you can use your standing mixer in order to cream your butter and sugar together. If you do not have a standing mixer, you'll need to get a large mixing bowl, and then I would recommend a wooden spoon. I would recommend a wooden spoon or a rubber spatula to try to cream your butter and sugar together, okay? This is a recipe that it's a lot easier to make with a mixer. But if you don't have a mixer like one of these, that's okay. You can still make these cookies and cream your butter and sugar together using a wooden spoon or a rubber spatula. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna take my butter. I'm gonna put this in here. Maybe I will. It says I need sugar. So my granulated sugar, I need 3 tablespoons. So I'm gonna take, like I said, my bowl again. Keep moving it around on you. And measure out my sugar. I have granulated sugar right here. So granulated sugar, when a recipe asks for granulated sugar, they want white sugar. That's what they're looking for, just white sugar like this. This is your granulated sugar. This is white sugar. For my granulated sugar, I'm gonna do the same thing I would with my flour. I'm gonna go ahead, scoop it out so it's heaping. Take a straight edge, level it off, like I've done before. Okay, and it says I need 3 tablespoons. So I've taken my 1 tablespoon measuring spoon. Okay, my 1 tablespoon. I measured it once so far. I need to measure this out 2 more times. So 1, see? 2. 3. Awesome. So not only does this recipe call for granulated sugar, for white sugar, but it also asks for brown sugar. Brown sugar is brown, okay? Looks like this. And I obviously have a great big bag of brown sugar because we like to make cookies at our house. We like lots of cookies, so I like to buy great big bags of brown sugar. The difference between brown sugar and your white sugar is brown sugar has molasses in it, okay? So brown sugar is different than white sugar. Brown sugar should not be used as a substitute in a recipe, okay? If you use brown sugar instead of white sugar, your recipe is gonna turn out a little different. So if you made this chocolate chip cookie recipe with just brown sugar and no white sugar in it, your cookies will actually turn out a little bit darker and a little bit chewier. Like I said, brown sugar has that molasses in it, and so it gives it a slightly different flavor, okay? And it also makes it very sticky, okay? And it wants to pack together. So brown sugar. Brown sugar, as we mentioned in class, is different than your other ingredients. Brown sugar, you want to pack it down. So my brown sugar, I've went ahead and made this fairly heaping. I'm going to go ahead and with my fingers or with a spoon, to the best of my ability, pack this down so it's nice and level. Okay. If I had excess, I would take the straight edge of my knife and level it off. But that's actually looks pretty packed to me. So I need 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, just like my 3 tablespoons of white sugar. So like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and pack that down, get that nice and level. Best I can. This one's a little bit full, so we're gonna go ahead and level it off. Awesome. For my vanilla extract, I need half a teaspoon of vanilla extract. So I'm gonna take my half a teaspoon again. Remember, that's smaller than my tablespoon. And measure out as level as I can. Half a teaspoon of vanilla. Okay. All right. Now I'm gonna cream these together. And while I'm doing that, I'm gonna put some of these things away. Okay, so as you can see, my butter and sugar is getting nice and creamy, okay? When you cream butter and sugar together, you want to mix your butter and sugar until they're just combined, and you want to try to aerate kind of that butter and sugar. So it should look kind of like this. It kind of looks like your butter gets looks a little bit sandy, kind of looks like sand. This is what you're looking for when you're creaming your butter and sugar together, okay? We don't want melted butter. We don't want big chunks of butter. We want it till it's all just combined. Can you guys see that? So sorry. So like I said, you want it to kind of look like this, where it gets nice and creamy, kind of looks a little bit like sand. You want it till it's all just kind of combined together. Okay. If you are using a mixer, as you're mixing your ingredients together, you might have to stop every once in a while and kind of scrape them off the side to make sure everything gets mixed together really well. So, our next ingredient, once our butter and sugar gets nice and creamy, like I said, kind of like it is right now, is our 1 egg. We're gonna add our 1 egg and beat that really well. And then slowly add in our flour. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, got my egg over here. I'm gonna crack my egg. When I crack my egg, I wanna make sure that I gently tap it on a flat surface. If I tap it on an edge, there's a good chance I'll get shell into my, good chance I'll get eggshell into my egg or into my dish. So I'm gonna go ahead and crack it on a flat surface. Take my 2 thumbs, gently push into the shell and pull it apart. Oh, that's cool. That's a double yolk, ladies and gentlemen. So there's 2 yolks in there. I'm gonna go ahead and use them both. That's pretty cool. That happens sometimes. So this is actually a double yolked egg instead of a single yolk. If that happens, you're more than welcome to try to take the second yolk out, or you can go ahead and just use the whole egg. That's perfectly fine. What I'd like for you to do though, is this is a good opportunity to talk about eggs in general. Eggs. It's always a good idea when you're using eggs in a recipe to crack them into a separate bowl before you put them in with the rest of your ingredients. Depending on what kind of eggs you get, sometimes you have situations like this where you end up with 2 yolks, which is pretty cool. Other times you have situations where maybe your egg is bloody or maybe your egg's gone bad. And when in that case, you shouldn't be using the egg. You should get a new one. It also helps if you accidentally get some eggshell in your when you crack your egg into the bowl, you have the opportunity to get the eggshell out. Okay? If that does happen, I would highly suggest taking just the shell of the egg to help scoop it out. Okay? That's a great easy way to get eggshell out of the egg. So I'm gonna go ahead, add my egg. Okay. And I'm gonna make sure to wash my hands. Again, eggs. If we think back to our foodborne illnesses we talked about, remember food safety sanitation? Eggs are associated with salmonella, okay? So you wanna make sure that you are washing your hands really well. That way you're not spreading salmonella everywhere, and that way people aren't gonna get sick eating your chocolate chip cookies. So far, so good. Got my sugar, my butter, my eggs. I'm gonna slowly start adding a little bit of flour in here. Just a little at a time. If I try to add it all at once, all my flour might go everywhere. Okay, so I'm at a little at a time. And we're gonna have a nice little cookie dough that forms. So while this is mixing, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna put a couple other ingredients away, okay, ladies and gentlemen? And I'll come right back to this. Okay, so I've got some flour mixed in here, I got my butter, I got my eggs. I still need to add the rest of my flour, so before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and scrape down the sides. As you can see, I got some flour kind of everywhere. Wanna make sure that everything's getting nice and combined. Okay. Finish adding the rest of my flour. Best that I can. Set that there for right now. So at this point in time, that cookie dough looks pretty well combined. We've got most of our stuff all mixed in together. Okay? Now, what's the one thing we're missing in this? We've got our flour, our baking soda, our salt, our butter, got our vanilla, our eggs. What kind of cookies are these? These are chocolate chip cookies, right? We're missing our chocolate chips. So, I'm gonna go ahead, scrape off as much of this dough that I possibly can. Maybe even taking my fingers and kind of getting some of that dough off, so I'm not missing any. Our recipe says we need 1 cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead, and what I have found is that it's easier to mix the chocolate chips in by hand than it is to use than it is to use the mixer. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna measure out, using my 1 cup scoop again, 1 cup of chocolate chips. Nope, and I guess I'm using mini chocolate chips. That's what I grabbed. Okay, we're using mini chocolate chips, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I have at home. I've got mini chocolate chips. There we go. It's being kind of a pain in the butt. And it looks like I don't quite have enough mini chocolate chips, so I'm gonna finish them off with some dark chocolate chips. So I'm gonna have a couple dark chocolate chips and a couple mini chocolate chips in this. That's okay. My husband and I like dark chocolate. So we're gonna do our best to level that off the best as we can. If you have a few extras, that's okay. But I'm gonna go ahead, add them to my bowl, and mix until they're just combined. And then for my recipe, it says once I stir in my chocolate morsels, so once I stir in my chocolate chips, I'm gonna drop them by rounded tablespoon into an ungreased baking sheet. So I'm gonna take my cookie sheet, or my baking sheet, that I have right here actually, and I'm either gonna take a spoon to scoop these out and put them on my baking sheet, or if you have a portion scoop, like I do at home, portion scoop, you might call this a cookie scoop, you can use a cookie scoop to put them on your baking sheet, okay? With chocolate chip cookies, you do not need to grease your baking sheet, okay? Your chocolate chip cookies have enough butter in them that they do not need additional, they don't need anything else put on the baking sheet. You don't need to get any non-stick cooking spray or anything. You should have enough butter that these should not stick on your baking sheet, okay? So, I'm gonna go ahead and drop them and put them on my baking sheet. When I do, chocolate chip cookies spread out, okay? So, I wanna make sure that I'm not putting my cookies right next to each other. As your cookies bake, they're gonna start to spread, okay? And they'll get kind of flat. All right. So as you're putting them on your baking sheet, you wanna make sure that you give them enough space so they can spread out and they don't touch each other. If you put them really close next to each other like this, they're gonna spread out and they're gonna get stuck together, okay? So you wanna move them over. Just give them plenty of room to bake. Okay. And if you look, I'm actually gonna need two baking sheets for this. So I actually have one that I'm gonna put in the oven right now, and then I'm gonna get the other one ready and we'll bake the second half here in just a minute. We're gonna put these in the oven and bake them from 9 to 11 minutes or until golden brown. A good rule of thumb when you are baking is that you should always bake whatever you're making for the least amount of time first and then add time later. So if you accidentally overbake your cookies, you can't do anything about it. But if your cookies are underbaked, you can always leave them in the oven for longer. So, practicing good safety, I'm gonna open up my oven door all the way. If I only open up part of the way, there's a good chance it might pop up and close on my arm. So I'm gonna open up my oven door all the way, and I'm gonna put my cookies in the center rack, okay? You need to make sure that your rack here is towards the center, not up towards the top and not up towards the bottom. If you leave them towards the center, that's gonna be they're gonna bake the most evenly that way, okay? So I've got that one tray in. When that comes out, I'm gonna go ahead and finish baking the rest of these, and I will show you all then what they look like, okay? Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So my cookies actually baked in the oven for about 8 minutes instead of 9 minutes. As you can see, they've started to get nice and golden brown. The edges here at the bottom are kind of darker in color. And I've gone ahead and I have pulled these out of the oven, okay? So I went ahead and pulled these out of the oven. The tops are pretty solid. They're not like smushing in when I press on them. And I'm gonna tell you a trick when you're baking cookies. This baking sheet, this cookie sheet right here, is still really hot. And your cookies actually continue to bake while on your cookie sheet for an additional like 2 to 5 minutes. So we're gonna go ahead and rather than trying to take our cookies off the cookie sheet right away and putting them on a cooling rack, I'm gonna let them set on this baking sheet for just a little bit longer. I'm gonna let them set for at least another 2 minutes before I try to take them off. If I try to take them off right now, more than likely my cookies are gonna fall apart on me. Okay, and they're just gonna kind of get mushed apart. But if I let them set for just a few more minutes, they should come off nice and easily. So I've went ahead and I've pulled them out and I've let them set for a few minutes already. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep talking to you all about our cookies. Okay. I'm gonna take one of my spatulas here. And like I said, I've went ahead and I've let these set for a few minutes already. To take my cookies off the tray, I'm gonna take my spatula and gently slide it underneath my cookies, okay? And I actually have a cooling rack right here underneath. That's what this is called. I'm gonna put my cookies on the cooling rack to finish letting them cool. So I've let them cool on the baking sheet for about 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes, so they can kind of finish baking and finish setting up. And then I am letting them finish cooling on our cooling rack. And I guarantee that probably what's gonna happen is I'm gonna let these set on our cooling rack. And while I am teaching my Foods 2 class later today, my husband's probably gonna come in here and steal some cookies. That's what I'm thinking is gonna happen. So this is how you make your chocolate chip cookies. Like I said, hopefully you guys will get to practice a lot of your measuring techniques and a lot of those measuring skills, and hopefully they turn out for you okay. But this is what they should look like when they're done. All right. I hope you guys enjoy.